Yeah. All right, the end of last week. There we go, that makes a little more sense. We were talking about some of the traits that we need in order to be more successful, very generally, for this transition or movement to land. And so we talked about several really important traits from support. We talked about some internal organs, right, respiration and circulation, with work hand in hand to move that oxygen around your body. And we had just started talking about some important sensory systems or sensory organs. And this is a conversation that we've had, of course, when we were talking about aquatic or water organisms, because all of our sensory systems very largely are very specialized, right? They work well with water or they work well with air, but because of the very specific and vast differences between air and water, most sensory organs do not work well in both mediums. So at the very end of class, we had re-reviewed or re-brought up this discussion about eyes or about vision. Okay, so remember when we talked about vision the first time, we had talked about the idea that the cornea, right, that clear portion of your eye is refracting. We talked about this term as well. Refract means to bend or focus. Okay, so your cornea is focusing light in the same way that water bends and focuses light. And this is the same reason back when we talked about life in the water, we said, well, the cornea is kind of useless. Because if light's already focusing light, or water is already focusing light, right, then our cornea as a fish is not going to help us much. And so the fishes relied a lot on the secondary feature, the lens, which is much deeper in the eye, to do most of the bending and focusing work. Now that we're in the air, though, air is very thin. It's not really doing anything as far as light bending work, right? The cornea of our eye then is, in fact, doing the vast majority of that light bend work for us. And this is something we kind of intuitively know. And so our blue box was talking about this. We talked about the very end of class, right? This is why humans, etc., can do things like get LASIK, right, which is that laser eye surgery, where they shape the outside, right, the cornea of your eye to help it bend and refract or focus light better on its own, right, removing the need for glasses or reducing potentially the need for glasses depending on your needs. Right, glasses are just an additional light focuser or bender, right, that you can add to your eyes to do more light focusing work when your cornea, for example, or in some cases the lens, doesn't do it for you. And so for anybody out in the air, right, the cornea is doing most of that light work. And whatever usually the cornea doesn't do, in our case, right, that lens is picking up the leftover work. Right, so our cornea and lens are flip-flopping jobs. This is the opposite of what we saw in the water. And this is where we left off at the end of class Friday. I don't know what day of the week it is. Okay. So this gives us the opportunity to look at several other sensory features that we talked about before. Okay. So hearing is something that we only tangentially were able to talk about before, but frankly, because hearing sucks underwater. Okay, so we had several other features that allow to deal basically without hearing very well. We had things like the lateral line that picked up vibrations. Okay, our bony fishes did have otoliths, okay, that allowed them to do some hearing, but everything's very muffled, excuse me, and mumbled underwater. Okay, sound doesn't carry well. Okay, sound does carry well above water. So we have extensive ears, okay, internal and external in most cases, that allow us to hear, and this will be something we talk about as we go. Okay, so the full system has all four parts here. Okay, and depending on what group you belong to, may depend on how many pieces that you have. So the first piece we want to talk about is called the pinna, okay, which is anything that is the outer portion on the ear, right? So this is something, for example, mammals have. All right, so if this is the outside of my ear, okay, we have some kind of funnel system, very fancy looking, okay, that helps bring sound in towards the ear, and specifically, of course, in towards the whole of your ear. Right. That giant skin flap on the side of your head has a name. All right. Some organisms have this, right? Others don't. Right? We don't have pinna, for example, on amphibians or reptiles. It would look weird. Okay. So regardless of that, the key of the ear, right, is to bring sound from the outside to the inside. Okay. The other big key is we need to translate that sound. Okay. What we hear out here, right, is sound waves or air waves. This is what we're starting with. Okay. Your brain can't do anything with that. Okay, so the whole system of your ear is to take that and translate that to what your brain can understand. Neural impulses, right? That's what our brain uses. Okay, so your ear is ultimately a complex system that just translates air waves, which is what my voice is doing right now, right? Fluctuating air with sound, and translating that via a series of steps to neural impulses, something your brain can actually use, right, like a computer language. So this takes multiple steps to do. At each step, we're going to translate language, and amplify the sound. Okay, that's the key between all three of these translators. Okay, most of which you're probably familiar with and just didn't realize necessarily this is what was happening the whole time. All right, so let's look at translator 1. Okay, referred to as your tympanum, or more colloquially, your eardrum. Okay, so we all have heard of our eardrum before. It's exactly the way it's set up. Okay, it's a very thin, stretched membrane, okay, across the first portion of your ear, and it functions exactly the way a drum does, right? So I am speaking. This is making air vibrate, right? These are our air waves. Okay, these vibrational patterns are coming into your ear, being funneled into your ear and bouncing off that membrane, just like, right, sound can bounce off a tightened membrane on a large drum. Okay, so this is my first conversion. Okay, I'm going to change air waves into physical vibrations. Okay, so I'm not vibrating air anymore, but I'm now vibrating something, all right, a physical thing. Okay, so that's translation number 1. right, from airwaves to a second thing, right, physical thing. And we're going to stay in our physical thing, physical vibration form. All right, so in area 2, we also have things that probably look familiar to us. Okay, our inner ear or little ear bones. Let's change colors. Okay, the incus, the malleus, and the stapes. Okay, so the key behind these 3 little bones, right, being hard structures, okay, we are going to continue to pass along, okay, the second form of our original sound, right, a physical vibration. So we've changed language, right, to language number 2. Okay, it's passed through a drum, just like when you hit a drum, it's going to become slightly louder, so we've amplified this. Okay, all of that's going to continue until we pass into the second translator. They're always windows, okay? Passing into what's known as the round window. So now we're ready to change language for the last time. Okay, so here we're going to enter into our third area. Trying to pick colors here. Should have stuck with blue before. All right, so in this area, right, we have a fluid-filled space. Right, it's filled with lymph. Okay, but what ends up happening here, and this is how we get those neural impulses, is along this sort of center stick, I have what are called hair cells. This is where this term comes from. Fancy name, very descriptive. Okay. It's basically stick area with lots of little hairs sitting on it in a space filled with fluid. So here's what ends up happening. As are in our green number 2 space, that's vibrating, right? As we get a big vibration coming through, right, that's going to hit our window. When we hit a window, this is like another drum. Okay, when you have a drum hit a window that has fluid behind it, what happens to the fluid? What happens to fluid when we hit it? It waves and spills. Okay? So as I hit this round window, and we've hit it with a vibration, I'm going to create a wave. Okay, through section 3. We're pushing waves with that fluid. The heavier or harder our vibrations are, right, the louder that sound was, okay, the bigger whoosh, our wave is going to be. Okay, as the waves come through, right, they're going to push down these little hair cells. Okay, like a wave washing over a shoreline, flattens grasses or whatever is standing in their way. And temporarily, my wave comes through, knocks over my little hair cells. Okay. Every time I knock over a hair cell, this is the trigger. A knocked over hair cell is my third and final translator. There's my language. Beep, 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 beep. That's going to send a neural impulse to the brain. Okay, and same system. Okay, if it's a bigger wave, it's going to bend my hair cell harder, right? Send a stronger neural impulse to my brain that it was a louder sound. Okay, if it was a little wave, whoosh, right, it's just barely going to bend that hair cell. It's going to send a smaller neural impulse. It's a quiet sound. Okay, by the same token, if it was a really, really, really big wave, whoosh, okay, we can break our poor little hair cells. All right, so they never stand up again. Okay, everybody in this room has probably had that happen, right? You've gone somewhere where there've been really, really, really loud noises, okay? Maybe a really, really big little kid party, right? Or a concert. And you've left afterwards and you've kind of had this white noise last maybe 12 hours, maybe a day if you were really, really bad. But it eventually goes away. Okay. Now, your hair cells, when you break them, continue to send neural impulses. That's that. Right? You broke off your hair cells, and they're trying to tell your brain, hey, this noise is really loud. Okay? And it never stops. They're broken. Okay? So even though the noise has stopped, it's going to continue to tell your brain, there's a really loud noise in here. There's no noise, and you look crazy in the diner later. Okay? Eventually your brain is like, I don't think there's any noise in here. There's something wrong with her. Okay? So they just like, shh. We're going to start not listening to these hair cells for now. Okay? They never get fixed. They don't get terminated. We just shut off the lines to the hair cells, and you've made yourself partially deaf. Okay? It's minor. Okay? Everybody, by the time that they are usually in their 50s and 60s, have done some kind of minor hearing damage to themselves. Okay? And this is how, right? You've heard some loud sound, and you've told your brain, look, we can't listen to these anymore. Right, so in the back of your head somewhere, there are little hair cells crying out, wah. Okay. This is the same way if you've heard really, really loud sounds, cars, accidents, explosions, those sorts of things. This is how larger scale permanent hearing damage can go as well. Okay, any question on this process? Okay, so the key here, right, is we're getting that sound in, and we need to translate it multiple times in order to get to that neural impulse, okay, where we're hopefully telling the brain valuable information. Okay, next I want to talk about olfaction. Remember, this is smells. We've talked about this before too. So we've talked about smelling a little bit underwater. Remember, we had rosettes, right, or rolled epithelial tissue within the nose of our fishes. Okay, and the key there was the more rosettes that we had, right, the more surface area in the nose that we had, the better sense of smell that we had. And that's still going to be the case here. Okay, but we have to deal with things like desiccation and gravity. So just plain rosettes of epithelial tissue are not going to stand up well long term, right? They'll sag and dry up and be damaged being out of the water that long. So we still want a system, right, that's still going to increase that surface area, give us lots and lots of places for our neurons to go, more surface area, better sense of smell, okay? But we'll do so in a way that will stand up much better to gravity than those epithelial rosettes would. Okay, so similar system, slightly different mechanism by which we achieve it. Okay, so that slightly different mechanism is called turbinates. And that refers to the bony outcroppings in our face on which tissue can grow and be supported against that gravity. And then those neurons sit. Okay, so the system's the same. The more of these bony outcroppings that you have, right, the more tissue and surface area there can be for sense of smell. So when you're looking at skulls, right, there's a very direct connection between increased number of turbinates and better sense of smell, right? So here we have a human and a deer skull. You can see humans have very few turbinates, and we know our sense of smell is kind of terrible. If we're lucky, we can smell dinner when we're coming down the stairs. And that's because we really only have 4, maybe 5. But with something like deer and bear and dogs, right, they have several that curl and wrap and wrap and wrap, and they look much more like the ones we saw in our fishes. And this gives them lots and lots of surface area, allowing them to smell meals or predators or friends for miles away.
So, like, they say that women have a better, like, sense of smell than men and, like, better sense of taste and stuff like that. Is that anyway, like, directly correlated to the structure? Like, you know, because, yeah.
So some of that, so Kaylee's question is, sometimes it's said that females, for example, have better senses of smell than males or better senses of taste. Some of that's just blatantly old wives' tales. For sense of smell, sometimes it can be the case, right? There's a surface area to volume ratio. So sometimes female noses can have more turbinates per like size of skull. But it's not always the case. It's certainly, there's little evidence to support that for taste, right? There's an individual variation. Sometimes there's pockets of people, right? Cultures or genetic dispositions in areas, right? Selection can drive those sorts of things. But there's not a lot that shows there's division of the sexes. Okay, really good and interesting question, though. Any others about any of the sensory systems before we pop on? And don't forget, if you're online, that you need to pop your mic on for me. Okay, we haven't talked about temperature very much, honestly, since we first discussed ectotherms and endotherms and all of that business since our definitions. So there are a few things we want to talk about a little bit, since air is a little less friendly to temperature. It changes temperature much more easily than water does, right? Water tends to maintain its temperature. It changes temperature much more slowly, in part because of that viscosity, right? It takes more energy to change a liter of water than it does to change the similar volume of air. And that's going to have an effect on organisms living in the air as we think about maintaining temperature for homeostasis, right, for successful living and growing. And so temperature regulation always is important in general, but becomes very important for our land-living creatures. Right? Now, generally speaking, we have what's called a performance curve, okay, meaning the temperature for your body, okay, has a sweet spot. Okay, where I can keep my body at a good amount, and if my body is around that, I have more energy to invest to doing body growth or reproduction without having to invest to not die. Okay, whereas if my body starts to slip outside of that happy, snappy zone, I have to start investing a lot of energy one way or another, okay, to not dying as opposed to breeding or growing. Okay, so this is what these curves look like. So we can immediately see, okay, peak. Okay, this is the happy, snappy zone. So if I'm at peak or somewhere around the peak of this curve, this is the best place for me to be. Okay, in other words, I can do these things. Okay, when my temperature is in that peak zone, and this is of course different for every organism or class or species, but when my body temperature, right, note that that's my X. When my body temperature is in that peak range, okay, so for us, right, somewhere around 98, then my performance is going to be the best, okay? I don't have to worry about dying, so I'm going to grow the fastest, the healthiest, the fullest, okay? I'm going to be able to reproduce the most successfully, have the most offspring, have the healthiest offspring, okay, whatever combination of those things make the most sense for whatever life history stage that I am at, okay? And the healthiest, most competitive, most successful me. That's what we're talking about being at peak. All other conditions being equal. Okay, I'm set up for being successful. As we slide off of peak, go ahead and change colors here. Okay, so I'm coming down off my peak on curve. We end up with this called the pejus range. And meaning worse. Okay, so situation just quite literally is not as good as peak. Okay, I'm not instantly going to die. Okay, no one's writhing on the floor crying. Okay, but it's not ideal conditions. So if we, again, are focused on our x-axis, okay, we can see that depending on what kind of organism I am, right, I'm either slightly too warm, right, I've come to the right, or slightly too cold of what my normal or ideal body temperature is. So what this means, right, is if I'm an endotherm, that I need to engage my metabolism, right, invest bodily metabolic energy into either cooling or warming myself, and we'll look at some examples on how this works. Well, probably yes, when we're back on Wednesday. Okay, or, okay, I need, as if I'm an ectotherm, right, I'll pick my reptilian butt up, for example. If I need to warm myself, I might pick a sunny spot. If I need to cool myself, right, maybe I need to go in the shade. But again, I need to invest energy on that instead of hiding from a predator, looking for a mate, protecting my nest, right? I need to work on regulating my temperature, right? This is taking time out of doing ideal blizzardy things. Okay, so this is what we mean by turning worse. Okay, I'm taking energy out of being a successful lizard or a successful hummingbird, right? Eating, breeding, competing. Okay, and I need to invest that time instead into warming and cooling myself. Okay, saving energy, whatever it is that I need. Okay, does everybody see that? Okay, and as we move our way down now, as we move into the third stage of this, okay, critical, okay, what I've termed here is on the edge. What? That's orange again, it's terrible. Okay, this is where we're getting to what we call like the inflection points, right? Or these bottom pieces of the curve. All right, so here I've basically reached the bottom turns, right, Ricky, of my parabola. Okay, so we're no longer dropping down the sides, we've made it down the bottom of the sides. Things are bad, okay? We've come quite a ways down, and we're now starting to move horizontally, either warm or cold. Okay, so as we look at either of these, I'm going to go ahead and erase this really quick. Okay, the key is we're not at the bottom in either place. Okay, remember our y-axis is my performance. Okay, my ability to do lizardy things or whatever animal I am. Okay, so if that hits 0, okay, my ability to perform is at 0. Okay, but, okay, here we would imagine my performance is quite low. Okay, the turning of this graph. Okay, this is about as hot or as cold as I can manage and still function at all. Okay, so these are areas, okay, where it's gotten, say, so hot or so cold, where I am not doing anything else but not dying. Okay, so I may be scrambling around, okay, scuffling for last bits of food, eating bark on trees. Right, maybe I'm a hummingbird and I've gone into torpor, right, freezing, hibernation. Okay, I'm not breeding. I'm not growing. Okay, I'm not doing anything that I would want to be doing to be a successful lizard, squirrel, bear, whatever. Okay, I'm just not dying. And that's the key. So this is bare minimum not death. How can we scrape by one more year? Shivering in a corner, living on bark. Okay, just can I get by? Okay, this is the very edge of what I could live through. And as we see, that's not very far from where our graph drops down into death, right? We would not expect our high and low critical zones. Okay, how can I scorch by just eating bark and shivering in a corner? That's not going to be terribly far from just literally freezing to death. Right? You cannot maintain living on the edge terribly long. Right? So something is going to have to change for that organism one way or the other. Okay, so we want two key features. Two key features as we look at this graphic. Okay, one, I'm going to clean it up here. Okay, being able to see all four major pieces when we look at it, right? Can I see in general, right? Certainly they're not necessarily discrete, except maybe peak. Okay, can I see body temperature versus rate of performance, right? Do I see these pieces on here? So I want to see all four parts, right? Peak, pejus, critical, and death. right? And understand the relationship, part 2, between my internal body temperature and my overall success or performance as an organism. Okay, so let's take a hot second, okay, and make sure that we are getting those 2 key pieces out of this before we move on. So are there any questions on that?
Can the scales of the fish be an example of this? The winter area that we read?
Yes, that's a really good example. So the question is, could we think about like the scales on the fish as we think through this? And absolutely, right? So the summer segment of the scale of a fish, right, where we see really fast growth, right? This would be a time of the year where we would see peak for the fish, right? They would have enough food, their body temperature would be in a good place, where they've clearly been able to invest in themselves, right? Been able to invest in growth. Whereas those winter rings, right, where they're not wide, they're very smushed, right? This is what we counted. This would be a time period where you could imagine the fish either being in that pejus range, or if it was a very bad year for that fish, right, they may even be in their low critical temperature, right? So they've not invested in themselves, right? That is I'm out of my temperature range, I'm very cold in that case, right? And I just need to get by. And those rings are reflecting those different parts, in that case on a yearly cycle of that fish's life. Okay, so one thing we do want to remember while we're thinking about this, and we're going to talk about several techniques, most of which we are not going to talk about till next time. But we want to think generally, right, that remember when we're talking about homeothermy, right, maintaining some kind of temperature, or even poikilothermy, right, that we are maintaining some kind of temperature, even if it's a range of 20 degrees. Okay. So when we're talking about maintaining our peak temperature, right, not dying, for our ectotherms, okay, remember, okay, they still are going to be in many cases homeotherms. And so they'll do this via some kind of behavioral thermoregulation. Okay, meaning, remember, they're not going to maintain their body temperature metabolically the way we do. Okay, they're getting their temperature from the environment. So, okay, they need to move around their environment in order to maintain their body temperature. Okay, so a cold lizard needs to move somewhere warm, right? Sunning ourselves on hot rock, okay? Hot lizard needs to move somewhere cold, okay? Move itself into the shade or something. Would you just do what I've asked, for heaven's sake? There we go. Okay. Endotherms seem like they would be much easier. Okay, but going out and finding food is only part of our trick. That almost looks like an E. So we'll stop here with our fabulous lizard being fabulous and not dead. I did. Okay, so your Socrative is up.